Okay, thank you for inviting me back. It's nice to see a couple of familiar faces. You'll have the opportunity to hear from my wife later on. She's better than me, so there's more in store for tonight. So as Rabbi Garfinkel mentioned, wanted to talk about Purim and a little bit more of the meaning behind it. I think this is something that's an important concept in Judaism, that the holidays are really laden with meaning. And I think what happens is that as people, let's say, have a kind of a sort of a superficial, those who've had Hebrew school training. So a lot of the Hebrew school training is sort of like get to the bar mitzvah or the bat mitzvah, kind of get Judaism 101, like the quick version. And it's just like a lot of different things that I think sometimes the meaning doesn't get conveyed. And the result is that there's a certain sense that there's like a shallowness of Judaism. And there's certain, maybe a lack of interest in what it really has to offer. And people sometimes end up searching for spirituality somewhere else. And they go looking for something that very often is right there in their own backyard. They say there's stories of people who went to India and they were looking for spirituality and for something more deep and meaningful. And then they ended up by the Dalai Lama. And there's a number of stories where the Dalai Lama said to them, you're Jewish, so go to Jerusalem, go to your teachers. There's so much depth and meaning in your religion. Like you're looking in the wrong place. It's right there in your own backyard. Go back and learn what you have to offer from the Dalai Lama. So I think confirming this idea. So there's a certain misnomer Rabbi Garfinkel mentioned, is that Purim is the Jewish Halloween. It's a Jewish Halloween because there's similarities. There's a party and there's dressing up and masquerading. And first of all, it's really completely different. The story of Purim happened about 2,500 years before anything related to Halloween, which is more like the 1600s. The first beginnings, if you look up online, you can see that's when it sort of emerged. And has really nothing to do with like spooky things and trying to dress up like, ghosts and goblins and all kinds of stuff like that. That's not what Purim's all about. In fact, there's a really opposite message of Purim, very different than Halloween. Both involve food and the giving and receiving of food, but there's one major difference. See, on Halloween, the mitzvah of Halloween, if we could call it that, is to receive, is to take, right? You go trick-or-treating and your goal is to go somewhere and request food and to take food. And Purim is exactly the opposite. It makes no difference if you ever get any food on Purim from anybody. But the mitzvah of the day is to give to other people. Okay, so Purim is a holiday about giving as opposed to trick-or-treating, which is more about taking. Okay, so that's also, again, a very big difference. And the costume and the masquerading, while they might have similarities, again, it's not. It's very different purposes. And hopefully that's one of the things in the course of our conversation tonight. We'll be able to talk about some of these different things about Purim. One of them is the costumes and the masquerading and the deeper meaning behind it. So I have a number of questions about Purim, and I'm hoping we'll be able to, in the course of this discussion, get to answer those questions. How much time do we have, Rabbi Garfinkel? Just want to make sure. Can you go?
We're going to start the Hamantashen at 7:30ish.
Okay, and you have a little break in between. Okay, let's see what we can do.
Okay.
I got it here, and when we're done, we're done. Okay,
Right.
Hopefully before that. Okay. So the question is, why do we dress up? Why do we masquerade on Purim? What is the meaning of it? Second question. One of the things that are used on the story of Purim is there's a mitzvah to hear the reading of the Megillah. Either in Megillah, and then there's something really fun for kids that when Haman's name is mentioned, so everyone's supposed to make a lot of noise and sort of stamp out the name of Haman, the wicked person who tried to destroy us. But there's a specific custom to when Haman's name is recited during the Megillah. I don't know what that is. That's it, the graga, right? So you wave, there's a thing, you hold the handle, and you spin this thing around, and you make noise. Why is that significant? Why the graga? What does that have to do with anything? You can make noise in so many different ways. As you'll find, if you ever go to a shul on Megillah reading, you'll hear all kinds of creative ways that kids and even adults like to make noise. Why do our sages say that Purim is a holiday that will never go away? All holidays they're all going to at some point disappear, but Purim's always going to last forever and ever, even when other holidays disappear. What is that supposed to mean? Why does Purim have that unique accolade, if you want to say that it never leaves? Now, there's a famous expression in Kabbalah. There's a story of one of the famous people in Kabbalah, the Arizal, Rav Yitzchak Luria. So he said,
Kabbalah, Rabbi?
Kabbalah.
Just to translate.
Kabbalah is the mysticism. Okay, mysticism of Judaism. Thank you. Sometimes I take it for granted. Just stop me if there's anything that I'm saying you're not connecting with. The mysticism of Judaism. So one of the main teachers of that is this person named the Arizal. And he says that Yom Kippur, okay, Yom Kippur, we're all familiar with that holiday. In fact, it's one of the holidays that people are most familiar with. Unfortunately, people identify, I think, Judaism too much with Yom Kippur, which is viewed as like a very serious, solemn, almost sad day. But Yom Kippur, the words literally mean that Yom Kippur is a Yom Kippurim. It's called Yom Kippurim. It's a day like Purim. Now that's a very, very strange comment. That Yom Kippur, the words literally mean it is a day like Purim. Yom Kippurim. It's a day like Purim. It has nothing to do with Purim. It seems it's exact, complete opposite of what Purim is. So what's the statement supposed to mean? Okay. There's another thing that took place on Purim. It's actually mentioned in the Megillah. It's explained by the sages. Is that on Purim there was a reaccepting of the Torah. The Torah was accepted by the Jewish people on Mount Sinai. That's where the holiday of Shavuot comes up, Shavuos. But during the story of Purim, there was a reaccepting of the Torah. Reaccepting of it. Kimu v'kiblu. They established kiblu and they accepted. This is an expression that's mentioned. What do you need a reaccepting of the Torah? We did it once already. Why are you reaccepting it again? Okay, keep on going here. So more questions, and hopefully we get the answers. Unlike every single other book in the Bible, in Tanakh, there's only one book that does not mention God's name. That's the Megillah. It does not mention God's name. Well, sort of. There's actually, it's hinted in the Megillah that any time it talks about King Achashverosh, it says Hamelech Achashverosh. But if it just says the King Achashverosh, but if it just says the king, it has a dual meaning. It's hidden into the Megillah that any time it says just the king, it refers to the King Achashverosh, but it also refers to the king meaning God. So it's in there, but it's really not in there. You don't see it's unique. Why is that? Okay. The focus on the day is materialism, enjoying, partying, feasting, drinking. And that seems so unspiritual and so unholy, right? It's not seemingly congruent and characteristic of Judaism, partying and food and the Seudah you just described, the big celebrations, important mitzvah. Why? Why is that so to speak, the mode of worship, the mode of celebration? Okay, Haman is from the nation of Amalek. Okay, who is Amalek? So Amalek, you know that there's Jacob and Esav. They were the brothers, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob and Esau, Jacob and Esav. So a descendant of Esav is Amalek. And this nation of Amalek was always very, very against the Jewish people. And Haman is a descendant from them. But what is this balance, this battle, I should say, that the underlying surface of this tension between the Jewish people and Haman and the nation of Amalek? There's a story of the Megillah. I think, Rabbi Garfield, you mentioned that you had discussed it briefly in one of the prior sessions. This is a general story, right? There's a little bit of familiarity.
A little bit, but don't assume anything because I don't know.
Different people from different types. Okay, got it.
You never know.
Okay, but so let me say this: that the story of the Megillah actually takes place over a 9-year period, and it's a bunch of random stories and things that happen. But it's like a bunch of coincidences, seemingly, and it all ends up with this great ending. Okay, but it's over a 9-year period. It's not a straight story. So why is that? Why is it laid out that way? Now, the holiday is called Purim. It's a strange name for a holiday because it's based on the fact that Purim means a lottery. Now, there was a lottery that was done when Haman wanted to determine what day to kill the Jewish people. So he determined it through a lottery. That's how he determined this was the day that he was going to kill the Jewish people. We know it didn't happen. But the holiday is called the lottery. It's called after the lottery that Haman tried to do to annihilate us. Why? Why call a holiday after that name? The name Esther, Megillas Esther. That's the Megillah. Esther is the heroine. She's the main character of the whole story. That really wasn't her name. Her real name was Hadassah. Okay? But she's called Esther. So how does that tie into, why was she called a different name than was her real name? And why is it the whole story, Megillah Esther, it's called after that? And then every holiday has their food. So the food of the Hamantash, right? Hanukkah has its latkes, the Hamantash. And so later on, my wife's going to tell you a little bit more about that. But what is unique about the Hamantash and why is that part of the story? So now, those are my questions. Let's see if we can come up with a concept about the holiday. And if we're able to lay this out well, we can answer all of those questions. Okay? So here we go. The first thing we have to understand about Judaism is that we don't commemorate holidays. They're not commemorations of what happened in the past, but we're reliving. If you can think of it like this, that it's not a continuum, that what happened in the past in history, so we've moved on, and we're kind of looking in reflection in the rearview mirror what happened in the past, and we commemorate what happened. Now, the same way, think about it like this, going back to the mysticism and the Kabbalah, the same way that the sun, right, the earth goes around the sun, like there's a cycle, right, it's cyclical. So what really happens is every holiday, there's something special about that holiday that was infused into our Jewish soul, into our Jewish essence. These events that created this holiday. And every year, as we kind of go around the cycle of the year, we revisit those holidays and we sort of bring into ourselves, into our being, into our Judaism, those special characteristics, those special things, that influx of energy and spirituality that took place with these holidays, we revisit it and we bring that into ourselves and we experience it. So it's not that, well, something happened 2,000 years ago, so therefore let's kind of commemorate it and talk about it. No, by going through the holiday and fulfilling the commandments of that holiday and experiencing what that holiday has to offer, we are reliving the very forces of spirituality that created that holiday, and we are infusing it into ourselves. Okay? That's the idea. And when we think that you're just commemorating something from the past, then we're missing the whole point. Then what does that have to do with us today? Why is that interesting and why is that meaningful? But if you view it this way, this is how my teacher explained it, Rabbi Weinberg, Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg. If you understand it this way, that every holiday, by reliving it and experiencing it and doing those mitzvahs, we are infusing ourselves with those same spiritual forces and energy that were created when the holiday originally came to be. So the idea is that we don't just go through the holidays, but when we celebrate it properly, the holiday, so to speak, goes through us. Okay? That's the idea. Now, this is certainly true of holidays on the biblical level. So certain holidays are actually mentioned in the Torah. Okay, so you have a Pesach. Everyone's familiar with that. You have Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah. These are holidays that are mentioned in the Torah. So obviously, those as part of the Holy Torah, which God put into the Torah based on experiences that we had. Again, Pesach has to do with the fact that we went through the whole leaving of Egypt and the plagues that took place and the splitting of the sea. So those things happen, but when Hashem says, God puts in the Torah, this is what you experience, this is a holiday, fulfill certain things, experiencing the Seder. That infuses you, of course, because that's coming from God. And the same with the other ones. But when you deal with a holiday that is not in the Torah, okay? Purim is an example, as well as Hanukkah. These are holidays, they're not mentioned in the Torah. These things happen well after the Torah. They happen in history. So what happens there? It's a similar thing, but we have to kind of understand what is it about those holidays and the circumstances and the dangers that took place and how we reacted to those holidays become things that get fixed into the calendar that once again, as we go through the year, a cycle, we revisit those, we're also pulling into ourselves spiritual energy and forces and whatever the benefits are of those holidays, we're also re-experiencing that. Even though these holidays are on what we call they are established by the rabbis. It wasn't mentioned in the Torah. But the same thing is true for them. So just to give an example, let's say like this. These holidays, we'll explain this. They can't be part of our essence in the same way because God didn't put that in the Torah. But they still, because the rabbis felt that these are, I would think, like experiences that become so essential to the Jewish people as they went through it, therefore, they become something that we need to follow and to keep for the rest of time. Okay, I'll explain that a little bit more. Okay, so let's first talk about the historical setting of Purim. Okay, when did this take place? What was this new spiritual energy, this new reality that we experience through this holiday of Purim, and something we need to continuously make a part of us as we go through life, as the Jewish people go throughout history? What happened? So if you understand the historical background, we can appreciate it a little bit better. There was a tremendous shift in how Jewish people lived before the story of Purim and after the story of Purim. So let me explain what that means. Purim took place during the 70 years of exile. After the period of the first temple, the first Beis HaMikdash, there was a 70-year period. Purim was the climax of that situation. And then we went into a new type of living, a new experience, which came with the building of the second temple, the second Beis HaMikdash. What was the difference? And what was this bridge here that Purim sort of was the climax of? And the answer is that from the time the Jews left Egypt, okay, until the exile in the story of Purim, the Jewish people lived in a much, much higher spiritual level. There was clear miracles that took place, revealed miracles. Constantly, we saw from the plagues and from the splitting of the sea and all the stories that took place in the desert. Okay, all the miracles that happened in the desert with the manna that was given and a well constantly traveled with them, and there was clouds that cleared. So they lived a very spiritual existence. But it was a very high level spiritual, but it didn't end there, because when they went into the land of Israel, there was always a prophet. Okay, the Jewish people always had prophets during this period of the first temple. And when you had a prophet who you can ask, what does God want from us? What should we do? What's the right course of action? So it was very clear. The relationship with God was very direct, very clear. You had a problem, you spoke to a prophet, told you what was going on, told you what to do. In that period of time, whereas afterwards we find there was many different arguments. You know, we say Judaism, there's, what's the answer? Well, it's an argument, machlokas. You do this, you do that. During this period of time, there was no arguments. We don't have recorded arguments. What was the right thing to do? You asked. You asked a direct connection to God. There were miracles that were visible. For example, when they built the first temple, you could go into the temple and you could see 10 miracles that took place every single day. So there was this existence where you were very connected with God in a very direct way. You knew exactly what He wanted. There was no doubt. There was no doubt what was right. People didn't have issues. Do you believe in God? Do you not believe in God? You believe in God. The question is, did I worship Him this way, or did I worship some idol? It's hard to even understand such a concept. But the reality of God was so clear and so visible that you couldn't miss it. So another example was when people did things wrong, there was immediate retribution. When people did things right, then there was plenty, there was abundance. You did things wrong, the rain stopped. Okay, and you talk to the prophet. Why is there no rain? Well, because you did this, this, and this. You have to change your ways. So we're talking about an experience, and this is the ultimate way the Jewish people are to live, with a very, very direct relationship with God, where there's no misunderstanding, there's no lack of clarity, there's no doubt what's right and what's wrong. Is God exist? Does He not exist? Are you atheist? What do you mean? Of course, it was very, very clear, and thus you have to understand the mistakes that are recorded in the Bible, and the punishments are kind of like at a stricter level, because you have to understand when you experience miracles. This is something explained by one of the great rabbis who lived in Israel 50 years ago, the Stipler. He says a lot of times people say, if I only would see a miracle, then I would, do this, and I would be better about it. I'd be more religious. Whatever. The problem is that if you see miracles, you're held to a much higher standard, right? Because then you don't have as much excuses. Well, why didn't you do what you're supposed to do? And that's why you see a lot of these punishments that go on, because you're held to a much higher standard. So we don't necessarily want to see open miracles, because it creates a problem that we can't do things wrong so easily. What happened then is the exile took place, and we entered a new period. And this period of time was you didn't have that direct connection with God. You didn't see Him in everything, and so to speak, God was sort of hidden. Okay, this is a period of time which is referred to as Hester Panim. Hester Panim means God's face is hidden. He's at a distance. His face is turned from us. No more open miracles. You don't see immediate things happening when you do things wrong or when you do things right. The Aron, for example, the Ark, the Holy Ark. I watch Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's in some warehouse somewhere. Okay, but I know it wasn't in the second temple, wasn't in the second Beis HaMikdash. Okay, so you didn't have that same revelation. You have to start looking into things. Why do things happen? Things seem random. Why should this happen? Why is bad things happening to good people and good things happening to bad people? And things aren't clear. You don't have the Navi anymore. You don't have the prophet to ask what's going on. And therefore, doubt starts creeping in. Is God really there? Is he guiding things? Is he really care what I'm doing and what I'm not doing? So this becomes this period what we call Hashem's face. God's face is hidden. And this was very clear. This was very clear in the times of the second Beis Hamikdash. But really where that attitude or that feeling was felt was during this exile, this 70-year period. Where is God? Does he see what's going on here? Haman is trying to kill us. What do we do about it? How do we react? Does he care? Did he abandon us? Did he throw us out? And through the story of Purim, when what's revealed is that everything that happened in the story of Purim, all of a sudden everything connects. These seem to be random coincidences all along the way, but as you follow through the story of the Megillah, you see how everything that happened, story after story, we can maybe get into if we have a little bit of time, but all these coincidences, if you have 25, 30 coincidences, you start to think maybe that's not coincidence anymore. And that's what the story of Purim is about. These 9 years shows you how Achashverosh is making this big party. And really the party was to celebrate the destruction of the temple. That's really what it was. It was a calculation. 70 years had passed. God abandoned the Jewish people. We have nothing to worry about. Let's throw a big celebration. And the Jews are there. They're celebrating, and they weren't really supposed to. And then Vashti, is supposed to come, and she gets killed because she doesn't come. There's this whole tension going on between. It's actually interesting. There's this tension between Achashverosh and Vashti. And it plays out in the Megillah in a very, very subtle way. See, the problem is that Vashti came from royalty. She was a granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar. Achashverosh was a stable boy. He sort of rose to power through strength and through getting involved with the right people. So there was always this tension between Achashverosh and Vashti. That Achashverosh had to prove himself that I'm really a king, right? Even though he was a commoner. And he always has to assert himself. He has this complex. And Vashti's always like, I made you. I'm royalty. I have blue blood, right? You're really only something because of me. So the tension plays out here. And I can actually, if you look carefully, anytime it says in the story of the Megillah, it says Queen Vashti, right? That's where she's kind of emphasizing, kind of flexing her muscles. I'm the queen, it happened to be Vashti. Whenever Achashverosh, except for the last time, which I'll explain in a second, whenever Achashverosh is talking about Vashti, it's always Vashti Hamalka, Vashti the queen. And she always responds, Malka Vashti, the queen Vashti. I'm a queen, and you're the commoner. She's like, no. You're great and everything like that, but you're just Vashti. You happen to be the queen because of me. And it plays out at the end. The only time actually it says differently is that when she's about to get killed, because the king is drunk, and she's disrespecting him, and he says, off with her head. And then they say, okay, off with her head. And then he starts to regret what's happening. So he says, no, treat her Malka Vashti. Now he calls her the queen, because he really regrets it, but he went too far. There's no way he could pull it back. Okay, for some reason, they had this thing in the Megillah that once the king says something, it's like he can't pull it back. It's the strangest thing. Like you can't say I made a mistake. So he was stuck. Okay. Anyway, that's kind of a side point on that. But all these things come together, and there's this little story that takes place in the Megillah where these two guards are trying to talk about assassinating the king, and they're talking in this language that very few people knew. Happens to be Mordechai, the other hero of the story. He's sitting there nearby the gates of the palace. Because he's a member of the Sanhedrin, of the highest Jewish court, everyone in the highest Jewish court had to know 70 languages, had to know every language there was. Okay, it was a criteria to be on this court. Can you imagine, just that alone? Forget about the Torah knowledge. He happens to know this language, and he hears they're about to assassinate the king. So he tells Queen Esther at the time, who reveals it to the king, knocks off these two guys, seeming like that's the end of the story. Okay, what's that random fact going on, doing there? But later on, the king can't sleep at night. He's having a hard time sleeping, and he's just feeling like maybe someone's out to get me. Maybe I didn't pay someone back who deserved a reward. And he starts going through his books of his chronicles of people that did things for him. And he discovers Mordechai was the guy who saved him from this assassination. Okay? And then he wants to know, what should I do to do for this? Meanwhile, the archenemy Haman, who can't wait to kill Mordechai and can't wait till the next morning, marches into the king in the middle of the night. And the king says, what's this guy coming in here all of a sudden? He's like, the second in the command, you got to be careful, right? He's the one who might try to oust you. And why he's there, he says, what should I do? And he says, put these, dress him up in the king's clothing and the king's horse. And he says, okay, do that to Mordechai. Okay, so all these things, let me just give you a couple examples. All these things sort of come together in Megillah that they seem random. And what happens is that the Jewish people saw, God's behind this veil. All this stuff is happening. Like, he's not abandoning us. And maybe he's not as visible and as present for us. But when you start taking all these random things coming together, you say, you know what? God's really there. He's not there the way he was in the past. He's sort of hiding his face a little bit, but he's always there. And too many random things and coincidences become clear that it's not coincidence. And everything sort of adds up that God is really there behind us. But that's a new existence for the Jewish people. And that plays out in the story of Purim. So what they realize is it's not fate, it's not luck, but God's behind the curtain. And he's making things happen. And when the Jewish people realized this, and they sort of accepted this, and they celebrated this, so this became sort of a watershed, a spiritual situation where they said, you know what? We realize that there's a new reality that we have to get used to, that things aren't going to happen immediate, where you see God right away, and everything is clear. You can just ask a prophet what's going on. We have to look and see that coincidence is not just coincidence, and God's really there. He's hiding behind the curtain, and we have to learn to accept God in a way that was different than in the past, but no less the fact that God still cares about the Jewish people. And that was what was infused into the story of Purim. And that is what we experience, or we're supposed to experience every year. When we celebrate Purim, we're supposed to be taking into the fact that our life seems sometimes random, and seems like, why are things happening? And you could explain it away. But you are to understand and believe that really God is behind things that we're doing, and what we do matters. And if we do good, something good's going to come from that. Maybe not right away, but it's going to happen down the road. And same thing, the opposite. And that's what Purim gave us. It gave us that ability to sort of live in a new world, a new existence, where God's hidden, but that doesn't mean he's not there. And we have to find him there. And that attitude, for example, when we experience that, that's what we're supposed to be taking in on Purim. That God's still there, even if it's not manifest the way it used to be, but it's still there. And if we can absorb that concept, it helps us in how we view a lot of things in life. So for example, the wars of Israel, okay? The wars of Israel, the War of Independence, the 6-Day War, the War of Yom Kippur, where we won these wars against all odds, against all odds. And if you want to look and say, well, how did it happen? You can say, well, this happened. It was just fortunate. It was just the right moment. And we knocked off the Egyptian Air Force on the ground because certain conditions were in place, and that's how it happened. And you go through that, and you can explain it all away as it's just a natural occurrence. But there's a story they say about the generals. It was a general in West Point that one of the cadets asked the general, said, why are we not learning about the wars in Israel? The Yom Kippur War, the 67 War. We learn battle tactics and techniques from all these other wars, but we don't learn about that. Why not? And the general said, we can't learn tactics from the 6-Day War and from the Yom Kippur War. They were so unexplainable and inexplicable, and how it happened and the way things happened, because it's not normal. It's not normal. We can't learn lessons from that because what happened there, it's not something we can explain. And what gives us the ability to look at a situation like that and say, you know what? There are miracles. There's no splitting of the sea, right? Man's not coming down from heaven, and frogs aren't jumping everywhere on people's heads. But there are miracles going on behind the scenes. And life is not random, and things aren't random, and God has not abandoned us, and he's still a part of us. And that's what holiday of Purim allows us to take into our souls and to understand. And that's what the goal is of the holiday of Purim. And this now explains why there had to be a new accepting of the Torah. We already accepted the Torah, so why are we accepting the Torah again? And why is it more meaningful? And the answer is simple. Because we needed to accept the Torah under a new reality. The Torah that we accepted before, there was a certain coercion, if you will. Like, of course we're going to accept it. How do you not accept God's Torah when he just led you through the sea, the sea splits? It's a miraculous thing. You've been through all these plagues. You see everything going on. Like, how can you not accept it? It's like, of course we have to. God, blank check. Whatever you say, God, Na'aseh v'nishma, we'll do what you say. We know you're there. It's easy. But in the story of Purim, it becomes harder. Are you still there? Are you really there? This Haman's going to annihilate us through this lottery? and this random thing, and the Beis HaMikdash is it's 70 years are done. We're finished. It's over. Where are you? To accept God in that situation, to accept the Torah with this reality where you're going to be hidden, God. I'm not always going to see you so manifest, but I still have to accept that the relationship's there. The Torah is still there. We're going to accept it. We're going to accept you. We're going to accept what happens in life and make sense of it all. Even if it's not obvious, that requires a new acceptance of the Torah. And that's a much harder acceptance of the Torah because it takes much more strength to see God through the veil. So let's see if we can answer a few more questions here. So this also explains why Purim is a holiday that will last forever. See, all of the other holidays, so some major miraculous thing took place. For example, Passover, we know, Pesach, all these things we just talked about, the plagues and the splitting of the sea. Okay, pretty amazing stuff that God did for us. Okay, the holiday of Sukkot. Okay, so the holiday of Sukkot represents that we were protected by these clouds. There was these clouds that traveled with us and just protect us from all the elements and gave a comfort level and air conditioning, exactly what we needed. But that's all coming from God. Well, in the times of Mashiach, we're told that we're going to have miracles that are going to trump those. They're going to trump those miracles. And things are going to be even more amazing in how God sort of leads us to the final purpose of the world. So those God-infused things, they were great in the past, but they're going to be even better. So, when you experience something even more amazing, you kind of forget the previous thing that was kind of amazing, but this is even more amazing. That sort of goes away. What Purim is, and that's why it will never go away, is where we ourselves, we sort of said, God, we know you're there, even though it's not so obvious. We invested ourselves into that relationship. We initiated that relationship. It could have been looked at as it's all random. And forget it, and you've abandoned us. But that's not how the Jewish people responded. They responded with this, God, we know that's a new reality, it's going to be different, but the relationship's still there. And we're going to accept it, and we're going to accept you, and we're going to look to find you in our everyday life, and not just think you've abandoned us. The Torah still works, the Torah still goes, we accept that. So when we accept that on our own, right, that's something we invest into that relationship, and we infuse it from ourselves, that's something that will never go away. Okay? Nothing else can trump that. That came from us. That's what Purim is. It's a holiday where we said, God, we accept you. We see you're hidden there, but you're there. And we're gonna stick with that. We're going to still thrive with this relationship, and we're not going to forget you. That's something that can never go away. Something that we put into the relationship. It wasn't that put onto us. And that explains also why the Grager. So it's interesting that the item or the object used on Hanukkah is the dreidel, right? The dreidel. You have this dreidel and you spin it, right? So you hold on from the top. The Grager is something that you hold on to from the bottom. So that's not random, because nothing in Judaism is random. Okay, that's the point of this whole talk tonight. The Grager we hold down because that happened from below. Something we ourselves, we acknowledge and accept it. God, you're hidden, but you're there. So therefore, the action comes from below. Whereas the story of Hanukkah, the miracle of the oil lasting for 8 days, that comes from above. So therefore, the object is spinning from the top. In Purim, the Grager is something coming from below. Now, I'm going to tell you something really, a very fascinating thing. To try to explain why Yom Kippur is like Purim, which seems to be bizarre. When you live in a world like we do, where God is hidden, his face is hidden, and we have to find him. It's not obvious. So that means we're living in a much more physical world, a much more material world. It's a less spiritual world because it's not so obvious that there's a relationship with God. It's harder to achieve, it's harder to recognize, it's harder to make that relationship. So it's a much more physical world. It's a world that lacks a certain amount of spirit to it. So talk about Yom Kippur. Okay, because Yom Kippur and Purim have a unique thing about them. So the first thing, let's explain why Yom Kippur is not as holy as Purim is because, as I said before, Purim is something we invested. We chose God, so to speak. Not that God chose us, which he did, but we chose him in the story of Purim. So it's almost on a higher level than it is on Yom Kippur when sort of God chose us. But the deeper issue is like this. Both these holidays, Yom Kippur and Purim, are unique to Judaism. So Judaism is predicated on the fact that we are a soul and a body together. A soul and a body together. Now that makes us very unique because the animal world is just a body. It's just a physical reality. It has instinct. An animal knows what to do, it knows how to get food, it knows how to reproduce. There's a certain instinctive thing about the animal. It's just a body. It doesn't have a neshama. It doesn't have a high-level soul like we have. So that's the animal world. On the opposite side, a pure soul is like an angel, right? An angel is a pure soul. But an angel is also different than us in that, in a way, we are more powerful than angels because we have power to choose. We have free choice. We can choose what we want to do. We can choose our destiny. An angel is a spiritual being that just carries out missions that God wants the angel to do. It doesn't really get to choose. So, we're near the same level that we do. So we are this soul, this angel-like being. We have this incredibly high-level soul. But we're also a body. We're people. We have needs. We need to eat. We need to drink. We need to do the things that people need to do. And that's why we're very complicated creatures. Because an animal's life is not complicated. It just does what it does. It has instinct. An angel is not complicated. It has a mission, and it does. It doesn't have free choice. You take this human being with a body and a soul together. Okay? This is what keeps the psychologists and the psychiatrists in business, because we're so complex, because we have this constant forces coming at us, the body and the soul. Yom Kippur is the one day a year where we focus specifically on our soul. It's a day of a sort of asceticism. Okay? We ignore the needs of the body. We don't eat and we don't drink, and we focus on prayer and fasting, and that's the one day a year that we say, okay, this is the part of us that's purely soul. And we're going to imitate and be like an angel. But that's not a normal way we're supposed to be. It's a one-day type of thing. Purim is exactly the opposite. Purim is a day where we focus on the body. We focus on the materialism. It's drinking, right? It's eating. It's parties. It's giving food to people. It's giving money to people that need it. It's all about physical needs, because Purim is the day where we focus, we say, God, we're going to worship you with that aspect of us, which is the body. But in that worship, in that service, it's about finding you, God. It's not about materialism for the sake of materialism. Right? It's materialism that, can we take the materialism, this part of us that is a material being, and invest it in saying, but we're going to use these things to get closer to you, God. And we're going to find you in the world. Even things are hidden, even though you seem to be hidden. And we don't necessarily see why things happen the way they do. Sometimes we figure it out, sometimes we don't, but we know that there's reason to the madness, and that you're there and you're hidden. And this is a material world. We don't see the spirit is hidden. It's more material. But we're going to take that material and we're going to serve you, and we're going to recognize you, and we're going to use this to lift ourselves up to a higher plane. And understand, though, that there's a concept I think Christianity has sort of put into Judaism, that the way you become holy is by abstaining, is to be a monk or on a monastery somewhere. And understand that Judaism is not that way. Okay? We are this blend of body and soul. And we don't ignore the needs of the body. We're supposed to enjoy the world. Okay? We talk about Shabbos and having an Oneg Shabbos and nice meals. And that's part of what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to take the world, the physical world, and not suppress it, but use it in the service of God. Use it to make things more holy. Food and drink and money and prosperity. What are we doing with it? Are we making this world a better place? Are we making this world godly? Are we finding God in this world and letting that guide our lives? That's what we're supposed to do, not abstain. So once a year, okay. But the rest of the time, our goal is to try to use the material world to make it more spiritual. That's what Judaism really is about. One day a year, we're the angels. We focus on that part of our soul. But there's one day a year also where we say we're going to give a little bit more emphasis on the materialism. Because a world without God manifest is a world that's more material. It's more physical. It's less spiritual. But even in there, we have to find the meaning and the spirituality. And that's what the day of Purim is. And now we can understand that Yom Kippurim, it's a day like Purim. It's a day like Purim. But why is it, we say it's like Purim, it means Purim's on a higher level. Yom Kippur, okay, fast, deprive yourself, don't eat, don't drink, stay in the synagogue and pray. That's great. That's one way to, but the really, it's a day in its extreme, like Purim is in the extreme. But Purim's a more important extreme. It's more important if you can find God within the spiritual, within the physical world and the material world, and elevate that to make that more spiritual. So Yom Kippur is a day like Purim, because Purim is where we do it to the extreme in a harder way, in a much more meaningful way. And this kind of ties into the story of Amalek, because Amalek and Haman, where he came from, Amalek's whole purpose in this world is to instill doubt that there is no God, everything is random, it's all a lottery, it's all luck, nothing really adds up to anything. This is what Amalek is all about. So it's not just a battle of one enemy versus another, the Jewish people versus Haman. There's an underlying spiritual fury going on here, where Haman's whole point is it's luck. It's just this luck of the draw. That's all it is. Okay, there's no meaning. God's, give me a break. It's all to infuse doubt in us that none of this really matters. That's what Amalek's whole goal is. And what we fought Amalek and what we won, the message is you're wrong. He might be hidden, but he's there. And there is meaning to this world. And what we do matters. And our actions make a difference. And God cares about us. And if we do the right thing, things are going to be good. And if we don't, things are not going to be good. But there's reason to all of this. And there's meaning behind that which seems to be hidden. And it's not just random things. And perhaps that's the reason why the focus of Purim, why we call it Purim, is to emphasize that understand what this holiday is about. Purim is the lottery. It was all the luck of the draw. Nothing makes any difference. God's not there. That's a joke. There's no God. And what Purim is say, focus on what the name of this holiday was. It's the luck of the draw. It's just a lottery. Understand that that's exactly what we are celebrating the antithesis of. That we accepted God. We saw his hand. And we're always going to, every year when we visit this holiday, we're going to infuse ourselves by taking the material and taking the physical and elevating it to be more spiritual. Because you're wrong, Amalek. It's not like you think. There is reason and there's a purpose, and our existence makes a difference. And perhaps it's not just random, of course, that Hashem's name is not in the Megillah. Right? Why is Hashem's not in the Megillah? Because it's there, but it's hidden. That's the whole concept of Megillah. See God in that which is hidden. The Melech, when it says Melech, king, yeah, it's Achashverosh, but every time the word Melech is used, the word king, it's referring to Hashem. He's there in the Megillah. He's hidden. That's the whole point. Find God in that which is hidden. That's what this holiday is all about. And do it through the material world, which is less spiritual, but that also has to be used to serve God. And Esther, the word Esther comes from the word Haster, Aster, Panai. The word Esther itself means hidden. That's her name, because she was that hidden person. She hid who she really was. She never told Achashverosh she was Jewish until the last moment when it was the right time to say it. She hid herself. And the whole holiday is about the hiddenness of God. She hid herself from Achashverosh until the right time. And the word actually, Esther, comes from the word moon. The word Esther from Istaher, the moon. So what's interesting about the moon is that the moon sometimes reveals itself more fully, sometimes it hides itself. But there's always this hidden and revealed relationship, but also a moon, there's always that hidden aspect. There's always that dark side of the moon. So Esther represents the moon, represents this concept of hidden, and the whole approach that she took in the story. And this time was actually Esther's son, Darius II, who went and rebuilt the second temple. So this was the period of time in history where Esther, where the Jewish people, came upon a new existence, that they had to find God in a much more hidden world. And that was the uniqueness of Purim. And they did that, and by doing so, they infused this day, this holiday of Purim, with this concept that even though we live in a world where we don't have the way it's supposed to be, where God was always manifest, and you could find out everything through a prophet, and miracles happen all the time. They don't happen all the time. But yet, even in our existence, to this day, and going forward until we get to a time of Mashiach when we'll have this much more, the real relationship the Jewish people are supposed to have with God. But we have to remember to infuse ourselves with this idea that he may not look like he's there, it may look that things are random, but they're not. Find meaning in things and find patterns in why things happen. And if we incorporate that into ourselves, then we can look at everything that goes on in our life with much more meaning. And where do we get that power? Where do we get that energy? We get it from the holiday of Purim, which infuses us with that feeling and that understanding that God's hidden, but he's always there, and we have to always look for him in every aspect of our lives. Okay?